Hello, we are Group Winx Enchantix, and now we will present our macroeconomic topic. Should China be forced to let currency float like the others? To begin with, while the other great nations, such as the US, the UK, and Japan, are letting their currency float to a much greater extent, China, regarded as a significant player in today's global economy, still hesitates to introduce a massive shift in their present floating exchange rate regime, which had raised concern for many members in Congress over the past decade. Such notices were reasonable as some large-scale harm had unwantedly occurred and perturb the global economy. Therefore, the issue of whether China should be forced to change its current policy into a floating regime like the others had become a serious predicament. Therefore, in this presentation, we will first explore some key concepts and effects to the world, followed by a closer look into China's current exchange regime. After that, analyze the pros and cons of the scenario that China let their currency flow. And finally, we'll do some evaluation and draw conclusion under two perspectives, the world and China itself. Before coming to a deep analysis, it is essential to understand some basic terms, beginning with exchange rate. As broadly defined, an exchange rate is a ratio of one nation's currency value compared to that of another nation or economic zone. Also, the price at which a currency is exchanged to one another. The currency whose value is worth more when compared or exchanged is considered a strong one and vice versa. The exchange rate is commonly divided into three regimes: fixed, flexible, and floating one. Exchange rate's influence on the economy also needs to be mentioned. Firstly, it affects the price of imported goods and competitiveness, including the domestic one that rely on imported parts and raw materials. For instance, an increase in exchange rates will lead to a lower price in the exported product within a foreign market and fostering the competitiveness of the product. A specific case for such trading in real estate. Secondly, it also impacts the inflation rate. To clarify, as the exchange rate increases, the quantity of goods imported into countries with strong currency will rise, followed by a higher inflation rate in the country that export their products. Interest rate is the third influenced element to be illustrated. If the exchange rate lowers, resulting in a weak domestic currency, the central bank will have to raise interest rates to compensate for the inflation and avoid considerable adverse fluctuation in the currency. Besides such direct impacts, other indirect ones are the job market, ethical, environmental aspect. The effects are more commonly viewed as macro issues rather than individual ones. However, it needs to be taken into mind that every single person is affected by the chain fluctuation with little awareness every day. And now we'll move to the next part, the floating exchange rates and China's current policy, presented by Yi.
Next, we will define what a floating exchange rate is and look closer into China's exchange rate system. A report in 1973 defined floating exchange rates as those that arrive without intervention by the monetary authorities, that is, without the latter buying or selling foreign exchange in the market and without any form of exchange regulations. As the floating exchange rate is determined by the supply and demand of the market, it is sometimes referred to as self-correcting. After the year 1971, governments began to adopt the floating system, which led to the abandonment of the pegging degree from the Bretton Woods Conference in 1958. Regarding the case for China's exchange rate system, while most economies adopt the floating exchange rate, China, on the other hand, has a rather sophisticated monetary system, which is heavily tied to the government. In 1994, China first announced its decision to adopt the fixed exchange rate policy when its RMB was essentially pegged to the US dollar at a rate of 8.28 RMB per dollar. In July 2005, after an appreciation of 2.1% due to an increasing pressure from major trading partners, the People's Bank of China decided to convert into the managed float regime with reference to the basket of currency. A currency basket is a collection of multiple currency with varying weights that is used to determine the market value of another currency. And this was regarded as a significant shift in China's monetary policy, which continue to this day.
It's come to my part. So what will be the impact of the actions flowing on China? So first of all, we will go to the advantages of this foreign currency to the countries is known as the factory of the world. So China's currency fluctuations mainly aim to push the domestic demand and improve diplomatic and trade relations with the rest of the world, so that so they can focus on encouraging the use of RMB in the international trade. So in 2009, agreements for yuan cross-border business payment were negotiated with Hong Kong, Macau, and a few Asian countries. China has begun testing yuan-based commercial payment with business from those countries also. So by 2011, China has allowed all Chinese companies to undertake the international trade payment in RMBAS with any country in the globe. So as a result, by the end of 2013, the RMB used in the overseas payment has surged over the 2012. So as can be seen, a sensible RMB exchange rate adjustment will benefit China's long-term economic growth strategy, which can stimulate the foreign country currency investment in RMB and serve as a stepping stone to support domestic economic reform. Moreover, the appreciation of the Chinese yuan is generally favorable to the Chinese company on the rest of the world, since it removes the pressure on China from the United States and other Western countries. Because China purchases so many USD denominated commodities, as the RMB appreciated in value, central banks are able to reserve more of the currency, promoting the use of Chinese currency yuan over the world. Thereby, they can curbing raising inflations, so that peoples are the one who's most favorable in this case, because they can buy imported items as a lesser price, as well as the cost of gasoline and oil decrease. So it's come to me part.
Hello, with Trump's part, I'm Funyi, and I'm going to talk about the disadvantages that China will encounter if the China yuan is appreciated rapidly. So if China is forced to switch to manage floating exchange rate system, China will encounter the risk of a rapid appreciation, which could ultimately damage exports. For many years, Chinese leaders have declared that they intend to switch away from exports as the primary source of development and toward domestic consumption for long-term economic growth. However, statistics indicate that exports will remain a crucial role driver for the Chinese economy. So if the yuan appreciates rapidly, its exports will be more costly than those of other nations, reducing demand for exports. Then the less export demand, the less economic output due to the manufacturing boom slows or even contracts. So therefore, China's overall growth rate would falter, posing a conundrum for China's leaders. However, if the currency rises excessively fast, production costs for some multinationals in China might be higher, which ultimately hinders the desire to increase consumption in China. We all know that China is considered as the world's factory because it manufactures over half of the world's shoes, clothing, home appliances, vehicles, and other products. That means China's comparative advantage is in the labor-intensive industries, in which a significant number of people work to earn money, and that's the reason why China's leaders continue to invest and protect this industry. However, when the reduction in exports increases the interest rate, it will increase production costs, which could get passed along to the consumer. And moreover, if the trend of relocating factories from China to other countries like Vietnam to reduce the production and labor costs accelerates, job losses in numerous international companies in China may occur. So in general, when the Chinese yuan rises too fast, it will hinder the consumer demand and lower employees' welfare and living conditions.
Now let's move to the next part of this presentation. Hang and I present the opportunity to emerging countries that when there is a floated renminbi. The report of the Congressional Research Service 2013 stated that the appreciation of the RMB brings benefit to countries that have similar characteristics to China, like countries in Southeast Asia, Latin America, and India, which can provide cheap labor, have a lower standard of living, but hold the advantage of infrastructure. In the long run, the increase in the value of Chinese currency costs foreign investors higher in operating in China. This encourages foreign investors to leave China and allocate the capital to those countries mentioned above. In particular, a study by Meng et al. 2013 shows that when the RMB is appreciated by 10%, there is a decrease in China export by 10.425%. Under the scope of that study, export of Malaysia, Singapore, and Vietnam slightly increase when the renminbi is adjusted to the market-based exchange rate. On the other hand, due to the export-import linkage, when China export decreases, the export of those countries that sells goods to China, including Australia, the United States, Japan, and Korea, decrease as well. Next, I will continue this presentation with the drawback of unappreciated renminbi on the world. Thank you.
Now we are going to discuss the negative impacts of the briefly bloated renminbi with specific assumptions. The first one is that that renminbi when being briefly bloated will actually appreciate, and the second one is that these impacts will take place in the short run. Well, the unappreciated renminbi could actually worsen the U.S. trade deficit in the short run if the volume or demand of imports from China did not decline at the same rate that prices increased, or the so-called J-curve effect. It would take time for U.S. consumers of higher-priced Chinese products to find lower-priced or non-Chinese products or other alternatives, and thus it will exacerbate the U.S. trade deficit in the short run or in this period. Secondly, due to the effect of the undervalued renminbi, China has become known as the world's factory since its labor costs are that cheap. However, when the renminbi appreciates, many multinational firms will have to go find another factory that has skilled workers as well as low costs. Those companies that cannot find such much factories and are not able to adjust to such changes will have no choice but to halt production and may go bankrupt. Last but not least, when the renminbi appreciates, the demand for Chinese imports are expected to drop significantly. Regarding the population size of the People's Republic of China, when many manufacturing plants shut down, millions of Chinese people will lose their job, become unemployed, and GDP will diminish. Thus, China also demands less imports from other countries, less exports, causing the net export factors in the GDP formula of other countries to decrease, which leads to the decline of the GDP and eventually drag down the economies of neighboring nations. Moreover, since China is the second largest economy in the world, China accounts for a significant share of global GDP. Consequently, stock values may be threatened by a slowdown in the global GDP. To sum up, as the renminbi appreciates, in the short term, the world cannot take it as good news, since the impact of such transformation is tremendous and it needs immediate attention and action. This is also an appropriate time for the government to perform its role. To assist businesses in overcoming those short-term problems, the government may provide support both financially, in the form of grants and through access to expert advice, information, and services. In the long run, when everything is settled, the economy of the country shall get back to normal and the effect of the renminbi appreciation and depreciation shall wear off. So that is the end of my presentation. The next one will be presented by me.
Finally, for the conclusion, so our report has highlighted crucial arguments concerning the opposite sides of whether or not China's currency should be forced to adopt a floating system like other countries worldwide. Although this has been a controversial topic where losers and winners are a matter of relativity, we have come to the conclusion that China's exchange rate policy should take the well-being of other countries into consideration instead of adhering to a peg rate regime. Hence, China should be pressured into adopting the floating system for the overall world stability. So in the report, the discussed effect to China if the country adopt the floating system include, firstly, it will reduce China's inflation and enhance the purchasing power of the Chinese people as the RMB gradually strengthens. On the other hand, if China remain the managed float regime, it will help the country to boost its export and create a competitive advantage to other large economies in the world, at the same time posing a risk to more future trade war.
Since there's so many criticism against the depreciation of renminbi, specifically in the future, the renminbi is actually briefly floated and appreciates. The world is expected to be glad and benefits a lot from it. However, as we conducted this analysis, we have discovered that there's some major drawbacks that's coming along with this new currency policy, just like a double-edged sword. The world, in the short term, still suffer from this new policy, and all businesses around the world have to be well prepared if they do not want to be left behind or even worse, go out of service. Besides, the government had to devise some strategies to support its domestic businesses on the verge of appreciating renminbi. This in-advance preparation also helps the country overall economic growth despite the volatility of the renminbi. In brief, the world should not only prepare to embrace the opportunities when it comes to the appreciation of renminbi, but also to address the issues involving the change. Only then can it optimize the China new currency policy. And now it is time for our final evaluation. According to the preceding argument, the benefits of floating the renminbi exceed the drawbacks. As previously said,
the floating currency will assist China in relieving pressure from Western countries and United States, strengthening the renminbi and laying the groundwork for economic transformation and reform the country economy. In the global view, a rise in the value of the renminbi raises domestic operating expenses, creating an opportunity for developing and emerging economies in Southeast Asia, South Asia, and South America. These, however, are merely the short-term challenges that China and the rest of the world have to face. Adapting is difficult in the early stages of any change. In exchange, the long-term values it provides benefit both China and the rest of the world. So this is the end of our presentation. And well, we are Winx Enchantix. Thank you for listening. We do hope that you enjoy it. Yay.